of the night, I've been searching for moons, for an evil ogre in an ancient room. Was a fortunate son of the OSR. Without a 10-foot pole, I wouldn't get very far. The ground was murky and I caught a look as the dungeon master opened up his grim-toothed book. And then I fell into a spike pit. Oh yeah, a spike pit. Oh, a pit would have spikes in it.
I'm Colin Green, and you are listening to Spike Pit.
So today we've got a special guest on Spike Pit. I'd like to welcome Joe Salvador of Raven God Games. How you doing, Joe?
Great, Colin. How are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Recently done an overview of your game Eldritch Tales. I'm guessing perhaps people will know you through that. What I'd like to know is a little bit more about the sort of the backstory and how you came to be doing Eldritch Tales, how you got into gaming perhaps, and Raven God Games. What's the story behind Raven God Games?
Well, so I started gaming, in the '80s with Beckme. I've been in the gaming world, I guess, for a long time, in my mind at least. And then, probably about 2014 or so, I started getting into the OSR. I kind of explored a lot of different games, all the games I get my hands on, from Labyrinth Lord to Swords and Wizardry and everything else. And what I did basically was I started to grasp onto certain games, delving deeper, really caught my interest. Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, and then White Box as well. And all three of those games were inspirational to me and kind of sparked my creativity, I guess. And I wanted to write for it. So I mean that's really why I started to write, and really it was just a hobby. It's a creative outlet for me, and it's gradually become more than that.
Have you always played D&D, or did you have time away from it? Or
I've played every edition of D&D from Beckme, first edition, second edition, third edition. I played fourth edition twice, and then fifth edition. But no, I've played a lot of other games. Played a lot of Marvel superheroes, Palladium, various other games.
have you always seen RPGs as a creative outlet? Because myself, it's been a creative outlet when I haven't had other creative outlets, kind of thing. It's sort of been a savior for me in some regards. And I know, like, you do some art, and obviously you're writing.
I feel like everybody needs something to take their mind off of like real life or like the daily grind. And for me, it's writing, it's like setting design, like the creating settings, like you said, art, cartography. All those things have always been part of what I do outside of work or family or whatever.
Did you go to college and study any of these stuff, or has it just been a desire? There's always been that creative spark.
No, I my bachelor's is in history and my master's is in public history. I don't work in either of those fields.
Does that crop up in your gaming, like the history?
Particularly history, yes. I do a lot of whenever, particularly with like setting design. If I'm creating a new setting or writing a new campaign area, I always hit the history books. I hit like linguistic stuff. I'm like a name freak, so I'll go and I'll research like say Anglo-Saxon names, like what are the name parts, like how do you put them together and what do they mean. Like if I make a character, typically that's a bit like the name means something about the character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I'm kind of a psycho like that.
I think quite a few people are into their names and naming conventions, and I'm not an authority on it, but I definitely think if you get the wrong names, it can kind of sour a
Mm-hmm.
setting a little bit, or
Mm-hmm.
even, if you've got a group of four characters and they've all three of them have got really kind of cool setting appropriate names, and then one of them is Dave,
Mm-hmm.
just
Yeah, Bob the Samurai.
Bob the Samurai.
For me, it takes something out of the game. I like the immersion. It's part of the immersion, I guess. Creating a believable setting with believable characters.
We talk about that quite a lot amongst the anchorites, and I think that's a kind of a challenge that you set yourself, isn't it? When you're running a game, you want to get all the players engaged, and you want it to become this believable thing that's happening. You want to try and keep away from those jarring things. And I've recently been talking about the whole business of metagaming and stuff, but I don't. For me, perhaps talking about a rule or discussing something like that is not jarring in the same way as an off kind of name,
Yeah, I agree.
because I can still stay engaged,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're talking about a mechanism in a game that seems really appropriate. I can get more into it. See, we do this. So I've got the podcast. You do your writing, and you talk about it as a hobby. Not everybody then goes away and starts a publishing company. That doesn't seem to be the immediately obvious thing to do.
Sure.
So what's the story there then, Joe?
That was it's almost accidental, actually.
That's a bit like the podcast.
Yeah, right. Exactly, man. Like things just
Yeah.
happen. Now, like I said, when I came across some of these OSR games, and I was inspired to write, uh, one of the first things I did was I wrote a micro setting to be attached to Astonishing Swords and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, and I intended to like send it to like a fanzine or something like that, just to put it out, free of charge, whatever. And now, obviously, Ash is proprietary, so I wrote to Jeff Talanian, the owner writer,
Mm-hmm.
and sent him the little manuscript I had, and it was like 8 pages or 10 pages, something. And he writes back and he says, "I'll publish this if you'll write an adventure for it as well."
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first foray into writing kind of professionally, and that turned into Forgotten Fane of the Coiled Goddess, which is an Ash scenario. And from there, I also wrote for Delving Deeper. I wrote 2 classes for Delving Deeper, which is a samurai and a ninja, mostly with a lot of help from Simon Boole, who is the current author of Delving Deeper. He is a treasure trove of Dungeons and Dragons lore and history and understanding of the mechanics and how they work for 0th edition.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a big help with trying to get those balanced correctly and whatnot. I have a particular interest in things Japanese, so that was kind of like the natural place for me to go at that point.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. I hadn't realised you'd done anything for Ash.
But yeah, so when I wrote those 2 classes, I think that was the first time that I used the Raven God Games imprint. So that's how that all came about.
So you got more and more immersed into all that. Presumably, you met other people and got involved with different publishers. I noticed there's quite a few artist credits in your various things. I'm particularly impressed with your layout guy, Thomas Novosel, is it?
Yeah. Thomas did a great job with the layout in that. He did all of the edge work, kind of like along the edges of the pages. He came up with all of that, and he did a really fantastic job. He blew my socks off, man.
Yeah, because that was one of the first things I noticed about Eldritch Tales was the layout. I thought, oh man, this is really clever. And well, there's a lot of clever stuff about White Box, and I'm coming round to that a little bit more. And I notice quite a few people have picked up White Box and done their own thing with it. You've got White Star, World War II, Operation White Box, the original Hero's Journey, and fantastic medieval adventure game, White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game. The adventure game was the first I owned, but I got it around a similar time as Eldritch Tales. but they're really quite different. And what I was curious to know is had there been a conversation with other people that were working on white box projects? I just imagine maybe on G Plus or something like that, there was a whole bunch of you guys talking about white box, and you all doing your own kind of thing.
Honestly, no. I mean, I chatted with a few people, Charlie Mason and James Spawn, but not to the extent where it was like a collaboration, so to speak. Everybody just kind of found it. They found Whitebox. The the manuscript for Whitebox is like it's open license. Like you can go and download it, like a Word doc format, cut and paste it, and change it, and it's yours. So you'll notice that most of the Whitebox games, the core rules, they're all worded almost exactly the same. There's very similar things, and then you just kind of tailor those rules and those the basic fantasy rules and tailor them to your genre, your setting, or whatever.
So there's this interest in white box. Now there's got to be an interest there in Lovecraft or Eldritch stuff for you to want to go away and do that. And so I was thinking around that and wondering, have you or did you ever get into playing Call of Cthulhu, or were you reading Lovecraft?
A little bit of everything, actually. I came to Lovecraft through Robert E. Howard. Like I read Conan and other Robert E. Howard works before I read Lovecraft.
Mm-hmm.
Lovecraft was kind of like in the periphery. Like I knew about it, but I never really got into it as like a younger man. But then I guess probably in my mid-20s, I started reading Lovecraft, more actively, I guess. And a friend of mine picked up on it, and he ran Call of Cthulhu for us for quite a while. And that was my first experience with the game. And then aside from that, I played Call of Cthulhu at a con, and I think that's it as far as the actual COC game. But it's the idea of cosmicism and cosmic horror is something that really grabbed
Mm-hmm.
onto me. It sparks my imagination, I guess, more so than other types of horror like slasher horror or what have you. So I mean, I guess whenever I started working on Eldritch Tales, that would have been the end of 2015, and well, to be honest, my dad passed away not too long before that, and I was kind of looking for something for my brain to do, and that's kind of why I started writing it. And I knew I wanted to do something with White Box, and kind of looked around. I want to say White Lies was out at the time. White Star, I think, was out already. I don't know about Operation White Box and what came after that. But I looked at some of those games, and I just loved what they were doing, man. I loved how they were taking those early fantasy rules, the simplicity of them. Their White Box is real clean. Like there's a lot of room for the referee or the GM, whatever you want to call them, to just make a ruling and move on. Like you don't have to be bogged down in rules and that kind of thing. And that really appealed to me. So I kind of looked around to see what genres had been done in White Box, and Lovecraft wasn't. And I said, why am I not doing that? And that's just how it started.
And I noticed you mentioned it, that what drew you to White Box really is kind of the design space, in a way, I'm guessing. And I've noticed with the different games, just most recently I've read the World War II Operation White Box, and I notice when people, in particular, write the classes, what's going on there is there's quite an addition of design going on with the classes. So each class quite often has bespoke abilities. With Eldritch Tales, for a white box game, you've actually brought in quite a few, well, what would you call it, mechanisms or ideas? Well, it's ideas, really. You've got the archetypes, the classes. You've done a bit more with attribute feats and standardizing that a little bit. And then there's the other stuff where I think you've imported a lot of the flavour in, which is with the skills, the occupations, the contacts. Oh, and then of course a couple of attributes in the form of, well, whether you call them attributes, I'm not entirely sure, but you've got mythos law and you've got sanity. That selection of stuff has really brought the genre to white box, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's important to have mechanisms, I guess, right, that support the genre, right? Like you and I'm not going to sit here and say that I got everything perfectly correct because I don't think I did, but you have to have some sort of sanity mechanic for a Lovecraft game, right? Like that's kind of a standard. Like every game does it because in a lot of his stories, people lose it, right? Like they're seeing things that break their reality, right? Their understanding of the world of the cosmos is challenged, and that's what cosmic horror is really. Like that snaps your mind. But like you said, yeah, the classes I wanted to stick with the four core classes, but kind of manipulate them a little bit. So we have the combatant, which is the fighter, right? And you'll note that each one of them kind of focuses on an attribute. So the fighters or the combatant is basically strength or dex. The antiquarian is the intelligence guy. The socialite is the charismatic character, and then the opportunist is the dex guy, right? And that's kind of, I guess it's kind of a standard regardless. But what was it? D20 Modern that really focused on that, and it kind of appealed to me because your classes were actually like strength class, dex class. Like I think it was like fast and heart healthy or something. I don't know, tough maybe. And I knew in my mind that I wanted to focus on the attributes, and that's why I did the attribute feats. Like it's a really simple way of determining outcomes and conflict resolution, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So for anybody that missed the overview where I explained some of this stuff, it is a D6 resolution, a 1d6 resolution. If you've got an average ability with no bonus in an averagely difficult situation, you need a 5 or a 6 will get you success. At the GM end, you can make it harder, and then at the player end, you've got a possible +1, maybe +2, or minus. So if you're really hopeless, you're only going to do an average task on a 6, and you're only rolling when there's some sort of doubt about the outcome, and it wants to be. I think you put in there it's sort of a significant something sort of significant.
I don't want a game I don't want to make the game just devolve into just rolling dice all the time. I listen to a lot of different. For a while, I'm not doing it anymore, but I listened to a lot of different like actual plays, and there
Hmm.
were some called Cthulhu games that were literally just endless die rolls, and I was like, that doesn't seem appropriate for the genre. This is I mean, the a Mythos game is being directly pulled and inspired by literature. So I want the fiction to count in the game. I want character actions and player ideas to matter more than the die roll. If that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think reading it does seem like the rules get out of the way,
Hmm. Yeah, I agree.
but at the same time, there's something about your design of Eldritch Tales that has even managed to clean up a few concerns that I've had with, say, the fantasy medieval adventure game. I had a couple of concerns on there, and I think it's because really, it's basically a D&D type of thing.
Hmm.
There's probably going to be quite a lot of combat, whereas in Eldritch Tales, it seems like you've added a few more systems just to make it a little bit easier to make them rulings when it's not combat and you're just trying to do something else, like
Yes,
investigate things or social encounters.
yes, and that's part of what attribute feats where they come in.
Mm.
So you're finding clues or understanding a book or whatever. Uh, and like you said, like it's not intended to be a combat game. It could be spiced up and made into like a slugfest. I don't know how long the characters would last, but it's meant to be more of like it's a mystery game. you know,
Hmm.
contacts, your skills. There's a small skill set. Those are meant to help the players and the characters get through that investigation. And I made a conscious decision, actually. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed it or if it matters, but uh, on the character sheet, on the sheet that I designed, um, all the combat stuff is on the back, and all the skill sort of stuff is on the front. And so you're looking at that stuff.
I totally missed that.
All the combat stuff is not the first thing you're seeing.
I find this fascinating, the way that designers will tackle such a stripped down system and do things like this. Figure out, where is the focus? What do I want to get in there? You've provided so many useful tools as well. And I said this in the overview. There's loads of things in there. You can tell that you've run games and you kind of know some of the things that are going to be problems. Little things in there that will just break the ice a bit for a group that's sitting down. Just there's little box out sections that you put in there with some of the optional rules. I'm imagining that was totally deliberate, and you maybe agonised over some of this.
Yeah, I had, as I went through different drafts and whatnot, I had a lot of things that I was like cutting out, and I still like them, different ideas or whatever. So I kept them as optional rules or whatever. But if you look at some of the other white box games, there's a lot of optional rules. It's like a tradition, I think, in white box games where you just have a lot of like box text. If you want to do this, try it, see what happens.
The classic one that I noticed crops up is people will have the more like BX attribute modifiers. So they'll give you the option to kind of go up to a +2 or +3 bonuses, and the negatives get worse. If you're doing a resolving stuff with a D20, that's fair enough. But if you start adding +2 or +3 bonuses into Eldritch Tales because you're using that D6 resolution, you're going to get into trouble fast, aren't you?
Characters will get bonuses for their attribute feats if they have skills that would apply. The attribute bonus itself, like the +1, doesn't go onto the attribute feat die. It's all kind of tacked in, right? So like a high attribute is 4, 5, 6, and then that +1 it's already in there. But it's really clean. One of the things that I kind of have in the back of my mind that might be coming out relatively soon is more pulpy sort of adventures for Eldritch Tales, and how to make that happen. And one of the easiest ways to do that would be to change the attribute table. Basically, make your attributes stronger. So I don't know. For instance, like if you want to really set the 18 score apart and leave everything the same except for the 3 and the 18 would be, well, the 18 would be a success of 3, 4, 5, and 6 on the D6.
Right.
So I mean, that's just one thing that's off the top of my head that could work along those lines.
What you've got to promise me, Joe, is that you're not going to bring in a janky kind of opportunist percentage table for like find and remove traps.
I gotta scratch that then, man. I gotta take that out of my
that drives me mad. I hate that tackle thing, that thieves skill table.
No,
I've never liked it.
I agree.
Never liked it.
Yeah, like going back to me exploring different OSR games. That Thief and Delving Deeper. Well, I think that was the first time I saw that D6 resolution. And I was like, oh my god, this is amazing.
Yeah, and you can do so much with that D6 resolution thing, and it's already there, isn't it? With your listening and your opening doors and stuff, and sloping passages and whatnot. Whether it's a 1 or a 1 or a 2, and it's sort of like we all kind of already know that.
Yeah.
And then there's these other systems come in and kind of get tacked on, and I like the way that you've stripped them away. I mean, even in the white box fantasy,
it's a D6 in there. Yeah,
it's a D6 in there, but I noticed a couple of times they've used 2 D6, or they've changed it up, and like for morale, they use 2d6,
That's
but
right.
you changed your monsters and made sure the monsters stayed on the d6 scale, so you could keep. So you've basically got your roll 20 resolution for combat, haven't you?
Hmm.
And then it's d6 resolution, I think, for virtually every other rule.
Pretty much.
How does a loyalty? I can't remember how your loyalty works now.
Loyalty works on the D6. It's like morale. It mirrors
Yeah,
morale. I think everything else is D6. Plus one, -1 for damage, but it's still a D6 roll for the most part.
just looking at it seemed like you'd made a concerted effort to kind of clean that up in that area. There's one thing I like about fifth edition. I do like the unified mechanic of the D20. You've only got two, and that's and saving throws. Saving throws are interesting in white box because in other versions they do a lot of the heavy lifting with saving throws. Obviously, you've introduced the attribute feat roll, so that takes a little bit off the saving throws. But you've kept them, so you've got one saving throw value, which is like the difficulty rating, isn't it? And so as characters increase, the difficulty of saves comes down. But because you've kind of codified what the attributes mean a little bit more, and then each of the classes has got their sort of specialist area, which I've seen in other white box
Hmm.
things. They
Yeah.
get you got a little bit of a bump in maybe your resistance to poison and endurance and that. But it's because it's just like this one number and it's tied to the attributes. It's super flexible, and I remember looking at Beckme, even as a kid, I always thought, why aren't the saving throws tied up with the attributes? And you've got six attributes, and then there's five different saving throws, and it seemed like they were so close that kind of could tie together. In Eldritch Tales, there it was. I saw it, and it just seems to make so much sense.
I don't think that I'm the first one to codify that, but yeah, it just makes sense. Just tie it directly, and you'll know, like in Eldritch Tales, I didn't quite take the step to just say a strength saving throw or a Constitution saving throw. I didn't go that far. I just kind of linked them, and
Gave some examples.
yeah, just kind of some direction for the referee to pull on, and hopefully just make it a little bit more smooth. You know.
I think there's so much room for that as well. You don't need to bang on for ages and really rigidly codify something, but you don't have to strip it all away. It's just like there's a little. I think throughout the book, firstly, I found it super easy to read. So congrats on that. Very, very easy to read. I feel like it's one of them books I can pretty much pick it up, start reading it, and read through the whole thing. And there's so few books I can't. I'm not great at reading rule books, but this was a really pleasant, refreshing kind of change for me.
I appreciate that,
So I
man.
think
Yeah.
yeah, I think that made quite an impression on me because it's like, oh, but did I read this already? I've just read this book. It's like, what? Can't be. No, this is a rule book. Yeah, it is. I mean, admittedly, whenever it gets to a sample adventure or something, I tend to skim through sample adventures
Hmm.
because unless I'm running it, I tend to just skip it.
Sure.
But so that's the only thing I don't know too much about. But I did go through it to do the overview. The other thing is I don't want to talk about things like that because of spoilers.
Yeah, that's true.
So
Yeah.
it just flows so well, and I always felt there was like a helping hand. It's like you've provided at each point where you maybe have a question, you seem to have just come in there with the answer. Um, and like Operation White Box, I've come away. I've got a couple of queries on that. I know I can clear it up,
Hmm.
and I probably need to read it again. But there was just a couple of things that got me scratching my head. There's like a fire and move thing going on,
Yeah.
and a couple of things where I thought, I'm not too sure. But what Peter's done in that is he's done quite a comprehensive example of play that's gone through several turns. And now you normally get a couple of pages, but he's probably got 10, perhaps 10 pages of this example of play, and that can be really helpful for you. And I found it helpful for me just to see some of what he was trying to get across in that example of play. And I don't think designers do that enough. And designers' notes, I always think they're really helpful as well. But there seems to be, I don't know if maybe that's an acquired taste. A lot of people don't want stuff getting bloat into the games.
Yeah, I've seen both opinions on that. I feel like a lot of publishers don't want to do that because page count, basically.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
The more words you got in there, the more costly it is to produce it. But that kind of thing, I think I agree with you. I think that's really helpful. Um, and again, delving deeper, like Simon Bull right now is working on like version 5 or whatever that is fully annotated as to where he got rules from, like back in whether it was the original box or strategic review or whatever, or
Right.
just something that Gary Gygax wrote on a forum.
I think I might have actually heard that he was doing that from someone, because Ray Oates has just popped up on my screen, and it was actually Ray Oates that was doing a lot of talking about delving deeper. So that's sort of a sign, I think. He was a big fan of the way it was presented and stuff like that, and I know that Ray likes to sort of delve into the roots of the game and find, he'll go through the old strategic reviews, and of course he's making his own games and publishing his games with Jelly Saw, and I've played quite a lot of Ray's games, and it's really interesting to like now getting a chance to speak to the designer and find out a little bit of what's going on. It just fascinates me. I don't know what it is, and the designer's notes will crop up sometimes in war games. They'll put a back page with it in.
Sure.
And I just didn't sort of see much of it in RPGs until Ben Milton with Maze Rats. He mentioned a bit about design, and when he did Knave, he every couple of paragraphs, more or less in italics, there'd be a sentence of what he was thinking, because I think he was going. So he was trying to create an old school feel, but he was doing things that were quite a departure from the norm. So I guess he perhaps thought, I maybe need to just explain what I'm doing here, or people are just going to switch off.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really helpful to just kind of get inside the mind of the designer's intentions, really. Like if there's just little notes, even like you said at the back of the book, or I mean, it could be footnotes or whatever, but I can definitely see the benefit of it. Yeah, I didn't do it myself, but I'm certainly not opposed to it. Yeah.
Or even the other thing, if people were worried about the page count, maybe just do the exercise as like a short essay or something, and then just post it up online somewhere so that it exists for those that are interested, and you could just refer to it in your closing part of the book or in the introduction where you're introducing it. I would love to see more of that, and I think there's an audience for that sort of information.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Like especially with, in my mind at least, with OSR games that are kind of familiar, but they're bringing in new ideas and maybe some new mechanisms, and it'd be interesting to see, well, why'd they do this differently, or why did they change that or drop that. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And as far as Eldritch Tales goes, I brought things in, introduced new things for the genre.
That was so apparent as well. I thought you'd done a great job there. Really impressed with that. So for the folks like myself that are big fan of the game, you got Eldritch Inquirer #1 that came out earlier this year, wasn't it?
Yeah, January, I think. Yeah.
So the Eldritch Inquirer, what would you call that? It's like it's a bit more than a zine, isn't it?
Yeah, it grew out of this, like the zine territory, I think. Which is, that was my first intention with it, was just make it real simple, maybe 20 pages and throw out more, but that would have turned into probably less quality.
Right.
So as I wrote, it got a little bit bigger. My concept for the Eldritch Inquirer is to go through year by year of the 20s. So issue 1 was 1920. Issue 2 is going to be 1921, and so on. And each will kind of follow like a similar pattern. Like there's going to be historical information to help the referee build his games, or her games, so that they don't have to do the legwork to find all this information. Because we're not all scholars about the 20s. Like people just don't know those things. But if you can open up the Eldritch Inquirer and say what happened in March in 1920, and you can read a list, that's pretty simple. And then I'll probably include name lists in almost every one because, like I said, I'm a name freak. And then maybe some other like sort of like new mechanisms or classes or what have you, and an adventure. I intend to have an adventure in every one. So instead of putting out just an adventure or just like a supplement, it's all in one package.
It is somewhere between a zine and a supplement, isn't it? It seems like a zine. Zine seems a little bit throwaway, although not so much nowadays. I
No.
don't think anybody thinks of them like that. But I know you're like super discerning with your visuals and your paper and your printing and everything else. So you get like, it's like a proper little book.
Yeah. That was the first time that I did the layout like that, and particularly for printing. Like I hadn't done any kind of printing layout up until that point. So it was a learning experience for me. I learned that book's too slim to put any kind of spine text on because it floats all over the place. It's sometimes on the back, sometimes on the front. It just didn't work. So I ended up taking all that off. Just like little things that I learned how to do. So hopefully that'll become a little quicker for me in the future.
Right.
Yeah.
So number 2 will deal with 1921, and now just departing a little bit from the Eldritch Tales. Currently in the works, you've got Reaver. What's the elevator pitch for Reaver?
Reaver is my take on a sword and sorcery game with close ties to dark fantasy and historical fiction. And you and I have talked about this a little bit already, as far as like setting goes. Like like I go to the history books probably first and foremost for inspiration. So my settings are pretty realistic and tied to like things that we know. But no, Reaver is going to, it's coming from a lot of places. White Box is probably where it originally came from.
Okay.
Yeah, like my first like drafts of it were just like, it was like a White Box rewrite, more or less. But then I started introducing more things and, visiting different games for inspiration. But my hope is that it will, like a player could take it or a referee could take it and they could run a a Conan game or a Solomon Kane game or any kind of, they could even strip out the actual magic and just do historical fantasy or historical fiction. You could run a game like if you're familiar with Bernard Cornwell's work, his history books, his history fiction, something like that. Just run something like that, and you could easily do that. I think you could do that with Reaver.
So his most famous one is probably Sharp's Rifles
Absolutely.
and that sort of series.
Absolutely.
But he's done a Dark Ages one, hasn't he?
The Last Kingdom series is excellent. I just finished that. He did a rewrite of the Arthurian tale. So Reaver, I want Reaver to be malleable enough to support those slightly different but closely related genres.
It's interesting. It's interesting you say that because you've also seems you can't help yourself because you've done that with Eldritch Tales as well. Even in like in the appendices, the second appendix or something like that, you've introduced some of that history. I don't know if it's your interest in history
it probably
that's
is.
kind of like
to me, like I'm always jumping between different settings or genres, and one of the most interesting things about White Box is you can take the different games and just push them together and do something new. Like you could easily take some of the concepts from White Star and use Eldritch Tales and run like Mythos in space, or you could do White Lies, which is a espionage game, and use it with Eldritch Tales, and you would have Delta Green basically. So, I mean that kind of thing, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, so do I. I think that's really interesting when you can do that. Hence, my white box collection grows as we speak.
Yeah, I mean these books aren't too expensive. I mean you can have a little slim collection of white box books in different genres, and you could do whatever you wanted with them. Yeah. But no, with Reaver, yeah, like because I have a lot of different inspiration coming into it. I feel like I want to make it so that it can handle any of those things. Maybe just with some slight variations. Like I said, if you want to do a more historical game in the real world, just cut out the sorcery or cut it down. You know.
You're getting quite into the sorcery and the magical stuff in that system, aren't you? It's kind of
Yeah, and it's funny because to my mind, it's a low fantasy kind of game, but if you don't get the sorcery right, it's not going to be in genre. Um,
but a lot of it's the flavour, isn't it? Like you
yes.
say, the genre,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of vibe is a lot of it gets carried over with the kind of almost where it's perilous kind of magic,
Mm-hmm.
isn't it? It's kind of
Yeah,
sort of a little bit
absolutely.
sinister and
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
risky.
And I'm talking about different sources of inspiration. So I've looked at different books, different games, from Warhammer to Ash to what have you. And while some of the spells in Reaver are clearly drawn from like your average D&D spell, some of them are drawn from just completely different places, man. Like inspired for completely different things. And your high level magic user is going to be, I think it'd be pretty interesting. Like obviously I haven't played it yet. We haven't gotten that far. But I'm still kind of like trying to get sorcery particularly, right where it needs to be.
Yeah,
Um,
that was the impression I got.
I think as far as like combat and whatnot, that'll be familiar to pretty much everybody. It's basically the things that are more specific, like you said, to the flavor. It has to be right, or it won't serve the purpose.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's exciting stuff. Quite a lot going on to keep you busy. I don't suppose that Reaver's an anytime soon type of endeavour at the moment, is it?
No, my plans for that, I'm not really sure if I want to kickstart it. Like with Eldritch Tales, I produce that with my paycheck basically. So with Reaver, I might want to try a Kickstarter. Kind of afraid of Kickstarter, just because of the stories of failure. So if I go that way, it's going to be basically done aside from art.
So are you a face your demons type of guy, Joe? You know, the fact that you're a little bit wary of Kickstarter, is that enough to push you into tackling it?
Right, but very possibly. Like what's probably enough to push me into it is art. Like I want art that is going to like make it pop and bring the concept and the setting, if I put a setting in it, to life. And I can't do that myself. So
You've done quite a lot of your own art. Of course, sometimes it's difficult for me looking through to always know who's done what. I noticed you've got Del Tegler or
yeah,
Tegler.
yeah. Dell's an old standby of mine. He's a really great guy. Does some really good work.
Then that's the other gentleman from something or other studios.
You might be thinking of Kurt Komoda. Kurt Komoda,
Yeah,
I found on through his blog. I think I can't remember. But Kurt blew me away with his work on Lovecraftian monsters. If you visit his blog, I can't quite remember the name of it. Uh, the way he visualizes his monsters, he'll like just study animals or bugs or whatever and draw them and like kind of like use parts of them to like kind of like understand the full anatomy of like a ghoul, or
yeah,
what
right.
have you. It's incredible work. I think his art's amazing. Yeah.
And it does come across in the stuff of yours that I've got. That the art and the look of the whole thing is super important to you, and I like that because it definitely kind of the appearance of something will put me off or draw me in
Sure.
for whatever reason. I think, yeah,
But
it's. I went to art school.
hmm
I respond to visual stuff,
yeah,
and I know you need both things. You need good ideas. You need the writing, but some people just don't care about the art, and that's fair enough.
sure.
But I think if you wanna get the most people interested in your game, I think you can't afford to ignore it and just do a bit of a lackluster job with it.
Yeah.
I reckon it's definitely worth getting your art right, getting real nice, decent layout, because I've seen a lot of games fall down on the layout. They
hmm
can have nice art, great writing, and then just it don't come together.
Yeah.
There's just a certain sort of layout that you see, and it yeah, it's just sort of amateurish. It don't.
I agree. A good layout will it'll help you run the game, right? Like if you know where to find something and it's intuitive and you can easily find things or you can easily understand the flow of the book, that's really helpful, man.
The book flows, the right things
hmm
come out towards you that need to come out
Yeah.
to you. It's super important, and it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine that layout is like the poor cousin. I feel like it goes. I feel like it goes kind of writing, then art, then there's a couple of blank spaces, and then a
Sure.
few more blank spaces, and then layout stuck down there unnecessarily at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we come at a lot of games because we look at the OSR stuff, and a lot of it's just DIY. Like the original few things that I put out myself, they're not anything spectacular to look at. I don't need to plug any like programs, but once I found Affinity, it's incredible. It's relatively intuitive. It's easy to learn. I was using Scribus before, which Scribus is a free product that gets the job done, but it's nothing like Affinity. Yeah, but that really changed my production values when I'm doing my own work. Like obviously Tom knows what he's doing. Like Thomas did an amazing job. Yeah, I'm still learning. So
So, did you do your own layout for the Inquirer? Because I noticed there weren't a separate credit in there. So,
yeah, I did all that. And I before that, I think I did the referee screen for Eldritch Tales, and that was kind of like a learning experience. And then I started doing the Inquirer, and things kind of
so these things we're seeing now are the product of you getting your skills honed up and developed a little bit
yeah. I'm
with
always learning
Affinity. And
something new, man. Always learning something new.
every day's a school day, Joe.
Absolutely, that is a true fact.
I love that saying. I have to bring it into as many conversations as I can. I, I'd never heard it until relatively recently,
Yeah,
and it just tickles me. It's so spot on.
I love it. Yeah, I never heard it before.
Yeah.
That's the first time I heard it. Yeah, so
All right.
yeah, I love it.
It really is what I'm all about. I've always taught myself a lot of stuff and everything, and I love to ask questions and learn new things.
hmm
And I never care about being wrong either,
hmm
um, unless there was something like totally factual. But just accepting other people do things differently and being able to see that maybe your way's not always the best. And it's not necessarily about right and wrong.
hmm
It's just learning different ways.
Yeah,
It's all like they're all like tools in your toolbox that you can bring out once you've learned these things. They're there, aren't they? And
just keep an
I,
open
I
mind,
did it.
man. You just got to go through
Yeah,
life, keep an open mind, and just be willing and ready to learn new things.
yeah. Because your skills. I mean, I used to do quite a lot of lightweight backpacking and everything, and keeping your kit down. And
Yeah.
people always said, the lightest thing that you carry around is knowledge. If you can take something from your environment and turn it into something useful,
hmm
you that might save several pounds of equipment in your
Sure.
pack,
Sure.
and it all adds up. I love stuff like that.
Yeah, man.
But I'm windowing out now, Joe. I'm windowing out into lightweight backpacking. I don't even know how we got there.
No, I've done a bit of that myself. So
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Right. Where can people get hold of Eldritch Tales?
Drive Through RPG. You can find all of my products. You can find news about my game and my activities on ravengodgames.com, which will send you to my blog. Otherwise, you can find me on Discord and various other places. MeWe. I'm still on MeWe.
I just want to thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, buddy.
No worries. We've covered quite a lot of ground. I like these chats. Sometimes scheduling can be a problem, but we weren't too bad this time. I thought
No, yeah, we worked it out pretty quick, actually.
yeah, which is a refreshing change.
We're a big surprise. No, but yeah, very cool. Very cool. Good times.
Like I say, thanks, Joe. I hope people find that interesting, and well, catch up with you again soon.
All right. Cheers, Colin.
You take care.
I fell into a spike pit. Oh yeah, a spike pit. Oh, a pit would have spikes in it.